My name is Ossian, and I have held exactly 3 postings in my career with the Velhari Interstellar Compact. The first was on Friend 4, a frozen methane world where the locals communicated exclusively through synchronized bioluminescence and considered eye contact a declaration of war. The second was aboard the trading hub of Galactic Station, where 17 species crammed into a space designed for 4, and the cafeteria smelled like someone had boiled a shoe inside another shoe. And my third, my current posting, was supposed to be the easy one. Cultural Integration Observer, my supervisor Midra Vin had called it, waving a dismissive tentacle at the assignment brief. Earth, the new member, just watch the humans. Make sure they don't accidentally insult anyone. Write quarterly reports. She had said it the way you describe a vacation. I arrived at the Velhari Cultural Exchange compound in the city of Columbus, Ohio on a Tuesday in what the humans called early autumn. The trees, and I want to pause here to note that Earth is one of approximately 40 worlds with trees, and only 3 of those worlds have trees that spontaneously change color and drop their leaves every year in a behavior that is, scientifically speaking, completely unnecessary. We're turning orange and red and gold. I found it unsettling. Back home, when vegetation changed color, it meant it was dying from a toxin. Here, apparently, it just meant the season was shifting. The leaves were fine, everything was fine. I kept telling myself that. The compound sat adjacent to a human elementary school called Millbrook, which I quickly learned was the source of my first major problem. The school shared a fence line with our compound's recreational yard, and the children, 43 of them, ages 6 through 11, had developed an immediate and completely unmanageable interest in our 4 Velhari cultural exchange cubs. The cubs were here as part of the same integration program. Young Velhari between the ages of 8 and 12 were considered in a formative socialization window, and the compact's xenoanthropologists believed early cross-species contact during this window produced measurably better long-term diplomatic relationships. The science was solid. I had read the papers. What the papers had not covered was what happens when your 4 young Velhari, still nervous in their new environment and prone to stress humming at frequencies that interfered with the compound's electronics, are pressed against a chain-link fence every morning by a cluster of human children offering them juice boxes and asking if they wanted to play. Velhari cubs have 4 limbs, 2 legs, and 2 upper appendages that end in 3-fingered hands, along with a secondary set of smaller sensory arms near the collar that they use mostly for emotional expression. When they are frightened, those sensory arms fold tight against their chest. When they are curious, the arms fan out. When they are delighted, they flutter so fast they blur. By the 3rd morning, all 4 cubs had their sensory arms pressed flat against the fence, fluttering so hard I was concerned they might generate lift. The ringleader on the human side was a girl named Priya, age 9, who had apparently already read every available children's book about the Velhari and greeted them on day 1 by correctly pronouncing Sethavar, which is a Velhari greeting that loosely translates to, I see that you exist and I find it acceptable. The cubs had been completely undone by this. I cannot blame them. Even I found it charming. What do you do for fun? Priya asked them through the fence on the 4th day, speaking slowly and clearly the way she had apparently learned from a translation guide she found online. The translation matrix I wore in my left ear rendered it smoothly into Velhari standard. The oldest cub, Sevi, considered this carefully. We practice resonance sequences, she said, and we do memory threading. She paused. What do you do? Priya pointed at the grass behind her. We play football. I want to explain something about football because it matters. The game that human children in North America call football, the one played with an oblong ball, not the one the rest of Earth calls football, which is its own separate diplomatic incident, is, from an outside perspective, baffling. Players handle the ball with their hands for most of the game, which seems inconsistent with the name. The rules involve a system of downs, which are essentially counted attempts that reset under certain conditions, creating a layered structure of permitted failures that a species unfamiliar with human psychology would struggle to parse. The field is marked with lines representing 10-yard increments, and advancement is measured in yards, which is a unit of distance that the humans themselves replaced with metric almost everywhere except sports, which tells you something about humans relate to tradition versus practicality. But here is what I failed to appreciate during those first explanations. Sitting on a bench and watching Priya lead the cubs through a halting tutorial while the other Millbrook children orbited patiently. The game is extraordinarily physical. It requires spatial awareness, the ability to track multiple moving bodies simultaneously, rapid decision-making under pressure, and a precise understanding of momentum and trajectory. Velhari cubs, it turned out, were spectacular at all of those things. Their depth perception is better than ours, said a boy named Marco, age 10, after watching Sevi catch a thrown ball from 30 feet with one hand, sensory arms fanning in what I had come to recognize as surprise at herself. Like, way better. This was true. Velhari have 4 optical sensors arranged to provide nearly 300 degrees of visual field. They evolved on a world with significant aerial predation, which meant their ancestors spent millions of years needing to track fast-moving objects from multiple angles simultaneously. The neural architecture that resulted was, in football terms, basically cheating. What the Cubs lacked was the cultural intuition for the game's social logic. When to hold territory, when to press forward, when taking a loss now preserved greater options later. These are not instinctive conclusions. They are learned ones, and they are, I would argue, specifically human conclusions, rooted in a species that has been playing organized territorial games for thousands of years and has developed a sophisticated folk understanding of risk and patience and when to sacrifice a pawn. The children taught them through pure repetition and honest feedback. No, Kale, you had to throw it there because Jonah was open on the left C. When 2 people cover the same person, someone else is always open. Always. This from Priya, matter of fact, drawing a diagram in the dirt with a stick. Kale, the youngest cub, crouched and stared at the diagram with all 4 eyes wide. His sensory arms reached out and touched the lines she had drawn slowly, like he was reading them. Someone else is always open, he repeated. Always, she confirmed. He looked up at her with an expression I had no frame of reference for at the time, but that I later came to understand as the precise moment a mind encounters a principle it will carry for the rest of its life. I filed my first quarterly report 6 weeks into the posting. It was 14 pages. It covered the compound's infrastructure, the Cubs' adjustment metrics, my initial assessment of the cultural exchange program's objectives, and 3 paragraphs about the fence line interactions that I described, professionally, as informal cross-species recreational contact, apparently beneficial to cub socialization outcomes. What the report did not capture, because I did not yet have language for it, was what was actually happening. Every afternoon, weather permitting, the Millbrook children and the 4 Velhari cubs played football in the shared yard. The school had gotten permission from both the compound administration and the children's parents, and someone had installed a proper gate in the fence so they didn't have to keep passing the ball over the top. They played modified rules. No tackling, because the Cubs' sensory arms were not built for contact, and a 10-person maximum per side because that was how many could fit. The children learned things too, though they didn't frame it that way. They learned that Velhari communicate discomfort through a very slight vibration in the sensory arms, almost invisible, but once you knew to look for it, impossible to miss. Priya spotted it in Kale during a particularly chaotic scrimmage, stopped the game, and asked him quietly if he needed a break. He had looked at her with an expression of naked shock, and then said yes, and sat down for 5 minutes, and then came back and played harder than he had all day. The other children absorbed this without commentary. By the following week, all of them were casually monitoring the cubs' sensory arms the same way they monitored each other's faces. They just added it to their social vocabulary. Children are good at that. They don't theorize about cross-species communication. They just do it, because the data is right in front of them, and they are not yet old enough to have decided it should be complicated. I watched a boy named Dev, age 8, spend an entire afternoon learning to catch the way Kale caught, leading with the offhand, tracking the spiral with his secondary visual field by deliberately looking slightly to the side of the ball instead of directly at it. It didn't work. Humans don't have the right eye arrangement for it. But he was trying to learn a skill by inhabiting another body's logic, which is a form of empathy so advanced that most adult diplomats never quite manage it. I started writing those thin GS down, not for the report, just for myself. 11 weeks in, Millbrook Elementary held its annual Diversity Day, a school event originally designed for human cultural exchange, but which the principal, a calm woman named Dr. Ewan, had extended to include the compound cubs with a cheerful adaptability that I found characteristic of the humans I was meeting. The cubs participated. Sevi demonstrated Velhari resonance threading, a meditative practice involving layered harmonic humming that, when four practitioners do it simultaneously, produces a standing wave pattern that humans can feel in the chest. The children sat in a circle, and when the wave hit them, 23 of them involuntarily reached out and held hands. None of them had discussed this. They just did it. Then Priya's team played a football game against a pickup team of older kids, with the four cubs integrated into Priya's side. I don't want to oversell the game. It was 11-year-olds playing flag football in a schoolyard. But Sevi, tracking three defenders simultaneously with her 300-degree field, threw a pass to Marco that curved around a defender's outstretched arm with a precision that made the entire crowd of parents, siblings, and compound staff go very quiet and then very loud. And Kale, who had spent 11 weeks absorbing Priya's dirt diagram lesson about coverage gaps, made a cut so sharp and so well-timed that he was standing alone in the end zone for a full second before anyone realized where he was. Someone filmed it. Of course someone filmed it. The footage was not sophisticated. It was a parent's phone, slightly shaky, with wind noise on the audio. But Sevi's throw was unmistakable. The way her sensory arms fanned wide at the release, the unnatural precision of the arc, and Kale's celebration, which involved a full-body shimmer that Velhari do involuntarily when overwhelmed with positive emotion, was something no human had filmed in an unguarded moment before. The clip was on 6 different platforms within 4 hours. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed by an estimated 90 million people across Earth, which was still less than a week into becoming a full Compact member, and had not yet developed media fatigue about aliens. Within a week, the clip had been transmitted by human users who had figured out Compact communication protocols with the cheerful disregard for boundaries that characterized much of human internet culture, to 17 other member species. I received a formal inquiry from the Compact Cultural Bureau on a Wednesday morning. Envoy ASEAN, could you explain the nature of the recreational contact between Velhari cultural exchange cubs and human juvenile civilians, and what diplomatic significance, if any, should be assigned to the apparent emotional attachment displayed by the subjects? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, I'll send you the full file. Here is what the footage showed, if you watched it carefully. It showed Velhari cubs, species known throughout the Compact for an early socialization rigidity that made them notoriously difficult to integrate into mixed species educational environments, moving with loose, unguarded ease among human children. No stress folding of the sensory arms. No stress humming. Just 4 young Velhari playing a game they had learned 8 weeks ago, competing and laughing. Velhari laughter is a rapid clicking sound. You can hear it clearly in the audio and making mistakes and getting up and trying again. It showed human children monitoring Velhari body language not as a learned protocol but as a fluent social reflex. You can see it in the footage if you know what to look for. The quick glances at sensory arms, the automatic spatial adjustments to give the cubs room when they needed it, the way Priya held a brief whispered conference with Kale between plays that had nothing to do with the game. And it showed the celebration. When Kale scored, the human children reacted before the Velhari cubs did, shouting, jumping, crashing into him in the loose, exuberant collision that humans call a group hug. The cubs had never encountered this behavior before. Physical celebration of shared success is not a Velhari custom. Their culture marks achievement internally, with resonance, in a private emotional register. Kale stood inside the hug for a moment with his sensory arms completely still, which in Velhari body language means cognitive overload, too much input to process. And then, slowly, his sensory arms opened. Not fluttered. Opened. All the way wide, the position that in Velhari means something that doesn't translate cleanly into standard but is approximately, I am choosing to be part of this. Then the other three cubs crashed in from the edges, and the whole thing became a general celebration that neither species had a name for because it didn't belong entirely to either of them. That was the frame that circulate. They, that single frame, Kale inside the hug with his sensory arms open, became the image of the year in 4 separate compact media cycles. The Veldris Aesthetic Council, a body that for reasons of cultural history held significant political influence in 3 systems, formally declared it a document of interspecies significance. A copy was placed in the compact archives. The Velhari ambassador to the compact, a formidable elder named Thresh Avori who had served for 40 years and was not given to sentimentality, sent me a personal message. It said, "How long has this been happening?" 11 weeks, I wrote back. He took 3 days to respond. When he did, he wrote, "The Cubs' resonance signatures have been transmitted to us monthly, as per protocol. We noticed the change in baseline 6 weeks ago and attributed it to environmental adjustment. We did not ask the right question. We should have asked what was different." I didn't answer that. I wasn't sure what to say. What was different was Priya, age 9, who had read a children's book about the Velhari and decided to say hello correctly. What was different was 43 Millbrook Elementary kids who treated an unfamiliar species not as a problem to be solved, but as a game to be played together. What was different was the human instinct, documented, incidentally in their own scientific literature, the field they call developmental psychology, to build trust through shared activity before trying to build it through language, because children learn this long before they learn to distrust it. My final report on the first year of the Columbus Cultural Exchange Program was 63 pages. I submitted it on a gray November morning while the Millbrook kids were in school and the compound yard was quiet. The trees had finished their unnecessary color display and dropped their leaves, which the groundskeeping staff had raked into large piles, and which the cubs, this I noted in the report, had discovered could be jumped into, producing a rustling explosion that was apparently irresistible across species lines. The report was read by 17 departments. It generated 4 formal compact policy proposals, one of which, embedding juvenile cultural observers in civilian recreational environments rather than controlled diplomatic settings, passed into provisional policy within 8 months. The Velhari delegation sent a separate letter of commendation. The Compact's Secretary General mentioned it in her annual address. None of that is the part I think about. I think about a Thursday afternoon in October, 2 weeks before the Diversity Day game, when I was sitting on my bench doing field notes and Priya came and sat down next to me uninvited. "You write a lot," she said. "It is my job." "What do you write about?" I thought about it. I try to understand what is happening and explain it to people who are not here to see it. She considered this with the focused attention that I had come to recognize as characteristic of her. "Is it hard?" "Sometimes. The most important things are often the hardest to explain." She nodded as if this confirmed something she already suspected. Then, "Do you think Kale will be okay when they go home?" I looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "Because he's different now than when he got here. And sometimes when things change, it's scary to go back." I did not have an answer for that. I wrote it down instead. What I know, because I followed the Cubs' progress after they returned home 6 months later, is that Sevi became the first Velhari to formally study human game theory at the Compact Academy, where she applied football's spatial principles to diplomatic resource allocation in a thesis that her advisors called disquietingly practical. Kale entered the Compact's Mixed Species Youth Exchange Program the following year, and according to his orientation report, greeted his new human bunkmates with a phrase in accented English that he had apparently memorized. "I see that you exist, and I find it acceptable." They loved him immediately. Marco went on to play collegiate football and in a post-game interview his sophomore year, when asked where he learned to read defensive coverage, said honestly from a friend, and did not elaborate. And Priya, I checked, because I was curious, is currently 14, and has, according to the Compact Youth Diplomatic Corps intake records I am absolutely not supposed to have access to, already submitted her application. Her personal essay describes a football game in a schoolyard. Her stated reason for applying: I think the most important things happen before anyone decides they're important. I read that and sat with it for a while. Then I closed the file and went to see if the current batch of Cubs wanted to learn what a spiral throw was. They did, they always do. Envoy Drell Ossian served as Cultural Integration Observer, Earth Posting, for 3 years before accepting a C. Nior position with the Compact's newly formed Human Cooperation Initiative. He is credited, in the official record, with significant contributions to interspecies understanding. He would tell you the credit belongs to a 9-year-old who read a children's book. He would be right.